in the land where dawn was born and before pyramids rose in Egypt, before Rome laid its first stone, before Greece learned to dream in marble, there was Babylon, a city of clay and light, pressed into existence by the hands of farmers, scribes, and kings. And among them, one figure stands like a pillar of carved basalt against the shifting sands of time, Hammurabi, the king who dared to turn justice into words, and words into the backbone of civilization. But our story begins long before the stele, before the laws, before Babylon became a name whispered by empires. Imagine the world as it was nearly 4,000 years ago, a patchwork of rival city-states scattered across the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates braided themselves through fields of barley and herds of cattle. Cities like Larsa, Ashnunna, Mari, and Assyria jostled for power, their kings forging fragile alliances by day and plotting betrayals by night. Trade caravans creaked along dusty roads. Temples rose to the sky in great stepped ziggurats, and every man lived under the shadow of unpredictable floods, shifting borders, and the whims of rulers. And into this restless world, Babylon was born small, overlooked, modest, until one king stepped forward with a vision that would bind the land together and outlive every dynasty that came after him. Hammurabi did not simply command armies. He commanded order, and a universe that often felt chaotic and cruel. He believed that justice could be shaped, measured, written, and that a city united by fairness would endure longer than any won by conquest alone. So when he lifted the stylus, when he carved his 282 laws on a towering black stele beneath the gaze of the sun, Shamash, he was not just ruling Babylon. He was inventing the idea of civilization. Close your eyes. Feel the heat of the desert. Hear the soft scratching of reeds on clay. The story of Hammurabi is the story of how humanity first tried to tame itself, and how one king turned a fragile kingdom into an empire of ideas. Welcome to ancient Babylon. Welcome to the dawn of law. Hammurabi, the rise of a master strategist. When we think of Hammurabi today, one image inevitably comes to mind: a tall basalt stele, covered in cuneiform, crowned by a scene of the king receiving divine authority from the sun god Shamash. It is the Code of Hammurabi 282 carved laws that shaped how future civilizations understood justice. But the legendary code is only one facet of a ruler far more complex, more ambitious, and more brilliant than the stone on which he etched his legacy. The king behind the stone, nearly 3,800 years after he seized the throne, Hammurabi is remembered as a lawgiver, yet in his own time, he was known as something else entirely: a builder of empires, a master of strategy, and one of the most skilled political minds of the ancient world. He inherited Babylon not as the glittering imperial capital we imagine, but as a modest and relatively unremarkable city-state, sitting 60 miles south of what is now Baghdad, surrounded by older, richer, and more powerful rivals Larsa, Ashnunna, Mari, and Ashur. Babylon was a flickering lamp beside their blazing torches. Yet Hammurabi saw what others did not: Babylon's potential to become the beating heart of Mesopotamia, a reign that redefined power. From 1790 to 1750 BC, Hammurabi ruled with a blend of patience and precision rarely seen in the ancient world. According to historian Mark van de Murup, Hammurabi was not simply a legislator, he was a ruler, warrior, diplomat, and administrator, a man who excelled in every craft required to forge an empire. While his law code immortalized him, his greatest achievement was something less visible but far more powerful. He mastered the art of ruling people. Through calculated alliances, careful diplomacy, and the quiet expansion of his military strength, he built an empire stretching to 150 miles along the Tigris and Euphrates. From the Persian Gulf deep into the Mesopotamian heartland, the diplomat who played the long game, Hammurabi did not begin his reign with swords drawn. He began with a smile, a treaty, a promise, a handshake, and behind each gesture, a plan. As Villanova historian Kelly and Diamond notes, Hammurabi was a shrewd statesman and burdened by sentimental loyalty. He formed alliances when beneficial, broke them without hesitation, and manipulated the political landscape like a seasoned chess master. He created an early intelligence network, a web of envoys, informants, and spies who kept him updated on every whisper spoken in the palaces of his rivals. Knowledge was his greatest currency. For many years he relied not on force, but on diplomacy, strengthening Babylon's economy, reorganizing administration, improving irrigation, and preparing quietly. His rivals underestimated him, and that was his greatest advantage. The warrior king emerges. Only later in his reign did Hammurabi reveal the other half of his nature. When the time was right, when alliances had frayed, when enemies had weakened, when Babylon had grown strong, he struck decisively. City by city, throne by throne, he absorbed his former allies and crushed his former rivals. Not through wild conquest, but through methodical, calculated expansion. By the end of his life, Hammurabi had succeeded where many kings dreamed and failed. He transformed Babylon from a local power into the dominant force of Mesopotamia, the cradle of an empire whose influence would echo for millennia. Hammurabi, the builder, the conqueror, and the architect of empire. When Hammurabi ascended the throne in 1792 BC, Babylon was not the shining capital of empire that later ages would remember. It was a secondary city, important, yes, but overshadowed by stronger rivals like Larsa, whose formidable king, Rimsinai, had already defeated Hammurabi's father in battle. To many, Babylon seemed destined to remain a footnote in Mesopotamian politics, but Hammurabi saw a future no one else imagined. He saw a world in which Babylon was not merely protected, but revered, not merely prosperous, but unassailable. Fortifying the future, walls, water, and order. Immediately after taking power, Hammurabi began transforming the modest city-state into a fortress and a home worthy of loyalty. Historian Susan Weisbauer notes that he was the first Babylonian king to encircle the capital with protective walls, a symbolic and practical act. Fortifications sent a message: Babylon would not fall again, and its people were safe under his watch. Yet Hammurabi understood something essential: a strong city is not built by stone alone, it is built by hearts and minds. So he issued one of his most popular decrees, the cancellation of all public debts. He would repeat this measure 4 times during his reign. To farmers buried under loans, to merchants struggling to survive, to families haunted by collectors, Hammurabi became a liberator, a king who erased burdens rather than imposing them. Temples, canals, palaces, the architecture of power, like a modern leader boosting his reputation through infrastructure. Hammurabi began filling Babylon with the signs of prosperity: temples to honor the gods, granaries to guard against famine, expanded palaces to reflect stability, bridges across the Euphrates, linking both halves of the growing city, and, most famously, a grand irrigation canal that watered fields, expanded farmland, and protected against destructive floods. These projects were not just public works, they were statements. Wherever water flowed, Hammurabi wanted his name to flow with it. A king who knew how to tell his story. Hammurabi was not only a ruler, he was a master of self-promotion. He understood that kingship was a performance as much as it was a duty. When he completed his massive canal, he framed the project not as an act of human engineering, but as a sacred obligation entrusted to him by the gods. In the words recorded by historian Will Durant, Hammurabi proclaimed, "Its banks on both sides I turned into cultivated ground. I heaped up piles of grain. I provided unfailing water for the lands. The scattered people I gathered, pasture and water I provided them. I pastured them with abundance and settled them in peaceful dwellings. In these lines, Hammurabi cast himself as a shepherd king or ruler whose purpose was to nourish, protect, and unify, and the people believed him. Babylon prospered, wealth grew, agriculture flourished, and with prosperity came loyalty. When the time was right, the warrior woke up. For decades, Hammurabi fortified his city, not only with walls and canals, but with stability, trust, and an image of divine favor. He built slowly, quietly, methodically. Then when Babylon was strong enough, he changed the game. Historian Stephen Bertman notes that Hammurabi launched his campaigns with sudden and decisive force. In a remarkably short sequence, he conquered Ashnunna to the east, Assyria to the north, Larsa to the south, Mari to the west. Each victory expanded his reach, his resources, and his influence. But Hammurabi was not a brute conqueror. He used diplomacy as a weapon just as sharply as any spear. The master of alliances and betrayals, as the ancient history encyclopedia records. Hammurabi was a king who made alliances easily and broke them even more easily. He cultivated friendships when convenient, and discarded them the moment they became obstacles. He waged psychological and environmental warfare with equal skill. Sometimes he starved enemy cities by cutting off their water. Other times he destroyed them by releasing floodwaters from dams he controlled. By the time his troops arrived, his enemies were depleted, divided, and desperate. This was not cruelty, it was strategy. Hammurabi fought to win, and he fought to endure. From second-rate city to center of the world, by the end of his reign, Babylon was no longer overshadowed. It was the capital of a new order, a Mesopotamian superpower, rich in trade, secure in military might, and respected across the Near East. Hammurabi had accomplished the impossible. He turned a small, struggling kingdom into the greatest force of its age, and every canal, every temple, every law carved in stone whispered the same message: Babylon rose because Hammurabi built it, and Hammurabi built it to last. The Code of Hammurabi, when law became civilization, for all his conquests, canals, and monuments. Hammurabi's most enduring legacy is not a city or an empire, it is an idea. An idea chiseled into towering basalt stelae nearly 4,000 years ago. An idea so revolutionary that its echoes can still be heard in courtrooms and constitutions today. That idea was law-written, public, and changing. The Code of Hammurabi, inscribed upon stone pillars spread throughout his kingdom, proclaimed a bold and unprecedented vision that a stable society must be governed not by whim, not by fear, not by the moods of kings or the power of the wealthy, but by rules, clear rules, visible rules, rules that apply to everyone, a legal system designed to touch every corner of life. Hammurabi's code contained 282 laws, and their range is astonishing. They govern building, safety, wages, contracts, and inheritance, marriage, divorce, and alimony, property disputes, medical malpractice, assault, theft, and fraud, agricultural rights, damages caused by animals, and even the fees veterinarians should charge for treating oxen or donkeys. Code was not the first legal system. Older Sumerian kings had issued laws before him, but Hammurabi did something transformative. He gathered earlier laws, added new reforms, systematized them, and presented them as a unified body of justice sanctioned by the gods themselves. This was not a collection of royal decrees whispered through palace halls. It was a public declaration, carved in stone so that no one could pretend not to know. Justice for the powerful, justice for the powerless. Modern readers sometimes recoil at the code's harsh punishments, the eye for an eye principle, amputations for malpractice, death for extreme negligence. But as historian Kellyanne Diamond notes, the system also reveals a moral core surprising for its time. Among the strictness are laws that protect widows or orphans, victims of fraud. Message is unmistakable. Even the weakest members of society had rights, and even the mightiest could be held accountable. The code also pioneered concepts that feel strikingly modern. There are laws requiring evidence, establishing standards of proof, and prohibiting conviction without reliable testimony. The principle that one is innocent until proven guilty appears clearly in these ancient lines, a seed that would grow into one of the pillars of modern jurisprudence. In family law, the code outlines what may be the world's first formal alimony, providing support for divorced women, ensuring they were not cast aside to starve, a god, and a stone that spoke for all. The top of the great stele depicts Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the sun god and divine judge. In this scene, the message was unmistakable. Justice itself flows from the gods, but the king is its steward. By placing these stelae in public squares and temples, Hammurabi sent a profound message to all his subjects, farmers, craftsmen, nobles, priests, and merchants alike. Here is the law. It is the same whether you love me or hate me. It is the same whether you are rich or poor. It is the same whether you stand beside the throne or plow the soil. This stone will not change its judgment. In an age where rulers often wielded power arbitrarily, this idea was close to revolutionary. Justice became visible. Accountability became tangible. Order became the foundation upon which civilization could rise. Why Hammurabi's laws still matter today. The Code of Hammurabi remains a cornerstone of legal history because of its vision that laws should be codified, transparent, and supreme over personal bias. As Diamond explains, the code blended severity with compassion. It demanded responsibility from physicians and builders. It protected the vulnerable. It elevated fairness over privilege. In Hammurabi's world, justice became more than custom, more than tradition, more than royal whim. It became structure. It became identity. It became the soul of the state. And that is why, for millennia later, Hammurabi's stone still speaks. Hammurabi the Benevolent, the king who ruled with justice and compassion. When modern people imagine Hammurabi, they often picture a warrior king, a conqueror of cities, a strategist who bent rivers and rivals to his will. But inscribed deep within the basalt pillars of his code and scattered throughout the thousands of clay tablets that preserve his letters, another image emerges. It is the portrait of a ruler who understood something rare for the ancient world, that power is most enduring when it is experienced as fairness, not fear. A king who crafted his own legend. It is true that Hammurabi was, in many ways, one of history's earliest masters of political branding. His monumental laws were not only legal guidelines, they were public storytelling. The top of his law stele shows him standing respectfully before Shamash, the radiant god of justice, receiving authority directly from a divine hand. This image was meant to say, I do not rule because I conquered you. I rule because the gods themselves appointed me guardian of justice. As historian Kelly and Diamond notes, Hammurabi took enormous care in shaping how he was perceived. He wanted to be seen not merely as a king, but as the god's representative on earth, the defender of the weak, the builder of cities, the warrior who preserved order, and the final judge who would hear any complaint. In this sense, the code itself functioned as a kind of ancient public relations masterpiece, visible proof of a benevolent king. But unlike many rulers who crafted grand images of themselves, Hammurabi's self-portrait had substance behind it, a ruler who truly aimed to protect his people. And digging deeper into Hammurabi's administrative letters, a treasure trove of clay tablets discovered in palaces and archives, we find a king far more hands-on than legend suggests. He did not simply proclaim justice from afar. He enforced it personally. In these letters, Hammurabi repeatedly instructs governors, judges, and local officials to correct wrongs. investigate abuses, and ensure that ordinary people, not just nobles or elites, received fair treatment. He often intervened to reverse unjust decisions or demand additional inquiries. One recurring refrain appears again and again in his correspondence: "Let the wrong be made right." It is here that Hammurabi's humanity becomes unmistakable. He expected his officials to uphold justice, not merely loyalty. When they failed, he stepped in himself. Justice as the heart of kingship. As biographer Mark van Diemerup writes, Hammurabi's benevolence was not theatrical. It was deeply rooted in his understanding of kingship. He believed that the king's duty was not only to command armies and build monuments, but to care for the vulnerable, protect the oppressed, and ensure equity in the courts. Van Diemerup summarizes Hammurabi's approach with quiet admiration. He guaranteed that all people were judged fairly and did not have to fear his power. This was a revolutionary idea. In a world where kings were often the greatest danger to their own people, Hammurabi insisted on becoming their greatest defender. An ancient monarch with a modern sensibility, Hammurabi's concept of fairness resonates even today. His laws are stern, sometimes brutally so by modern standards, but the intent behind them remains strikingly familiar. A society cannot survive unless its people believe justice is real. Hammurabi understood that legitimacy flows not from the sword, but from trust. So he crafted laws you could read. He allowed appeals directly to him. He publicly declared his duty to protect widows, orphans, the poor, and the powerless. And he ensured that all could approach justice without fear. The result was not merely a legal code. It was a bond between the ruler and the ruled one, strong enough to hold an empire together for decades. The legacy of stone. How Hammurabi's code shaped the world. Nearly 4 millennia have passed since Hammurabi ruled the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates. Yet his voice, chiseled into dark basalt, still echoes through courtrooms and legal systems around the world. The Babylonian king is immortalized not only in ancient tablets, but also in the architecture of modern justice on the south wall of the United States Supreme Court. Among the carved figures of history's greatest lawgivers, Hammurabi stands watch. His code, created almost 3,800 years ago, remains one of humanity's earliest and most influential attempts to create a structured, principled legal order. A monument that outlived empire. The Code of Hammurabi is not simply a list of rules. It is a monument to civilization's earliest efforts to govern complex societies. Carved into a 7-foot basalt stele discovered in 1901 by French archaeologist Jacques de Morgan, the code contains 280 laws inscribed in cuneiform script. Today, the stele resides in the Louvre Museum in Paris, a silent testament to the intellectual ambition of ancient Mesopotamia. Though the Babylonian Empire itself vanished long ago, the code survived as both a cultural artifact and a conceptual foundation. It offers one of the clearest windows into how early societies resolved disputes, protected property, punished wrongdoing, regulated trade, and sought to ensure social stability. Kellyanne Diamond, professor of ancient Near Eastern history, speaks to its importance. It represents a well-preserved and detailed inscription about law and order during the first dynasty of Babylon. In other words, the code is not merely a relic, it is a blueprint of early justice. The first principles of law, justice, transparency, and order. Of many of the code's provisions seem harsh to modern sensibilities, yet the ideas behind them are astonishingly familiar. Hammurabi insisted that laws be public, predictable, and binding, not secrets known only to elites. By carving the laws in stone and erecting the stele in a public place, he effectively proclaimed, justice must be visible, or it is not justice at all. This concept that law must be written, knowable, and enforceable is foundational to modern legal systems. From the U.S. Constitution to European civil law, Several core principles from Hammurabi's code echo through modern courts. Presumption of evidence, the need to prove guilt rather than assume it. Procedural fairness, judges must hear both parties, review testimony, and issue impartial decisions. Contract regulation, agreements, loans, property sales, and marriage contracts require documentation. Consumer and business protections, builders, ship captains, doctors, farmers, and merchants were held accountable for professional negligence. Proportional punishment, penalties scaled based on the nature of the offense. Although ancient interpretations were far more rigid, these principles show that Hammurabi was not just maintaining order, he was systematizing justice. From Mesopotamia to modernity, a legal lineage thousands of years long. While the Code of Hammurabi was not the first legal collection in human history, it was the most comprehensive, public, and influential of its era. Over centuries, its ideas seeped into neighboring cultures, shaping Assyrian legal traditions through biblical law, including an eye for an eye, the concept already present in Hammurabi Greek legal philosophy. Roman law, the backbone of European jurisprudence. A Polish civil code, influential across Europe, Latin America, and beyond. Anglo-American legal principles, including the idea that laws apply to all citizens. The code is a bridge between ancient and modern systems, a demonstration that humanity's desire for fairness and order transcends time, a vision that continues to inspire courts today. What makes Hammurabi's code so enduring is not merely its age or scope, but its philosophical clarity. Hammurabi framed himself as the shepherd of his people, responsible for preventing the strong from oppressing the weak. This ideal, written at the top of the stele, remains a guiding star for contemporary legal systems. Modern jurists recognize in Hammurabi an early champion of rule-based governance. His insistence on written law echoes in the rule of law doctrine, constitutional rights, civil and criminal procedures, consumer protections, and judicial accountability. In a world that is infinitely more complex than Hammurabi's Babylon, one truth remains: societies endure when law is stable, transparent, and fair. A legacy set in stone and still alive. The Code of Hammurabi is more than a historical artifact. It is a declaration of humanity's earliest belief that justice must be structured, accessible, and universal. That idea continues to guide legal thought across continents and centuries, from ancient Mesopotamian courts to the Supreme Court of the United States. Hammurabi's influence endures not because of his conquests, but because of his conviction that a ruler's greatest duty is to uphold justice for all. The birth of justice, Hammurabi and the origins of innocent until proven guilty. Among Hammurabi's carved laws spanning everything from property disputes to medical malpractice, there lies a principle so foundational that it still governs modern courts. No one may be punished without proof. Though the Code of Hammurabi is often remembered for its harshest penalties, it is equally remarkable for establishing early standards of fairness, evidence, and moral responsibility in legal proceedings. Harsh punishments in a harsh world to modernize. Some of Hammurabi's punishments appear brutal. Crimes we would classify as civil offenses, such as poor construction work or the selling of stolen goods, could, under the code, cost a person their life. A slave who defied a master's authority might have an ear cut off. A builder whose house collapsed might face death as compensation for negligence, but this severity must be understood in context. Ancient Mesopotamia was a world without police forces, prisons, or standard bureaucratic oversight. Harsh penalties acted as deterrents in a society where a single collapsed building, ruined harvest, or botched medical procedure could plunge families or entire communities into ruin. Compassion written into law, and yet, embedded among the strictures are laws that reveal a surprisingly compassionate worldview. Professor Kelly and Diamond points out that many provisions protected those most vulnerable in society: widows, children, slaves, and the poor. Hammurabi's code contains what may be the earliest recorded form of alimony, ensuring financial support for women after divorce or widowhood. It also guarantees inheritance rights for children and places limits on debt servitude. These inclusions make it clear that Hammurabi saw himself not merely as an enforcer of order, but as a shepherd responsible for the welfare of his people. The first innocent until proven guilty among the code's most enduring contributions is its insistence on evidence-based justice. To convict someone, the accuser had to provide proof, witness testimony, documentation, or physical evidence. A mere accusation was not enough. This principle resonates powerfully in modern legal systems, especially in the United States, where innocent until proven guilty is a cornerstone of due process. Diamond underscores this connection. The innocent until proven guilty theme still resonates with us. In Hammurabi's Babylon, justice was not a blind swing of authority but a structured process in which claims had to be substantiated, and judges were expected to follow legal procedure, a divine seal of authority. At the top of the Hammurabi stele, the king is depicted standing before Shamash, the Mesopotamian sun god, and divine judge receiving the laws directly from the heavens. This image served a powerful political purpose. By placing divine authority behind his reforms, Hammurabi presented himself as the earthly agent of cosmic justice. His laws were not merely royal decrees. They were extensions of divine will. But this heavenly origin story, scholars emphasize, was more symbolic than literal, a legacy built on the past despite Hammurabi's careful self-legitimization. Historians like Amanda H. Padani remind us that these laws were not created from scratch. They evolved from centuries of earlier legal traditions, including the much older Code of Hammurabi, written roughly 300 years before Hammurabi. Hammurabi's laws relied more on monetary compensation and fewer physical punishments, showing that Mesopotamian justice was not static but dynamic, adapting to social changes, power structures, and new political realities. Bedoni explains, most punishments were actually fines. No matter what the laws said, the judicial system probably worked much the same way across those centuries. In other words, Hammurabi's stele was not simply a law book, it was a symbolic affirmation of the king's role as protector, judge, and moral authority. Justice that echoes across millennia. Though the world that produced Hammurabi is long gone, the code's influence endures. The ideas of fair judgment, evidence-based rulings, protection of the vulnerable, and codified public law continue to shape modern civilizations. The belief that justice must be written, accessible, and applied to all is one of humanity's most important innovations, and at the heart of it lies the same principle Hammurabi carved in stone nearly 4,000 years ago. Justice must not only be done, it must be proven. Law in stone, justice in practice, the real use of Hammurabi's code. When people imagine Hammurabi, they often picture the tall basalt stele engraved with 282 laws, the Code of Hammurabi standing like a solemn promise of justice in the bustling streets of ancient Babylon. But the reality behind that iconic monument is far more complex. The stele was both a legal text and a symbol, both an instructional guide and a piece of political theater. To understand Hammurabi as a statesman, we must examine not just what he carved in stone, but how law truly functioned in Mesopotamian courts, a legal code unlike any before it. As historian Don McCormick notes, Hammurabi's code stands out because of its sheer detail. Earlier Mesopotamian law codes existed, Ur-Nammas and Lipit-Ishtar's among them, but Hammurabi's was far more expansive, covering subjects as diverse as agricultural contracts, surgical malpractice, inheritance disputes, marital obligations, price regulation, and property damage. This level of specificity reveals how deeply Babylonian society had evolved by Hammurabi's time. The population was more diverse than ever. Merchants, farmers, scribes, priests, artisans, slaves, soldiers, and foreign residents all interacted within a single economic and social ecosystem. Laws had to reflect this growing complexity. As McCormick explains, as the population diversified, the law codes adapted to meet the new circumstances. Hammurabi's code becomes, therefore, not just a set of rules but a sociological document, a window into how people actually lived, traded, worked, argued, married, and managed their daily affairs, a monument to justice, or to Hammurabi himself. Yet the very comprehensiveness of the code raises a key question: was it truly used as law, or was it a proclamation of authority? Historians increasingly believe the latter. Despite the stele's impressive presence placed in public spaces for all to see, there is no surviving evidence that Mesopotamian judges ever consulted it in making decisions. Court tablets from Hammurabi's era feature disputes, testimonies, contracts, and verdicts, but never direct references to the code itself. The absence is striking. This suggests that the code was not a practical courtroom manual, but a symbolic declaration. Hammurabi's vision of ideal justice, gaps, omissions, and selective emphasis. Hammurabi carved laws covering the rental price of a plow ox, the return of runaway slaves, the obligations of field managers, and the fees surgeons could charge for mending broken bones. And yet, astonishingly, the code contains no straightforward law against murder. As historian Amanda Padani notes, Hammurabi made no attempt to cover all possible infractions, or to come up with any organizing principles behind them. This selective approach signals that the code was not meant to be exhaustive. Instead, it appears to be a curated collection, a demonstration of the king's moral authority, a guide to proper conduct, and a public reminder of what justice according to Hammurabi should look like. It was as much a political statement as a legal one. The code as legacy building. Hammurabi issued the code late in his 43-year reign, at a time when the king, having forged an empire through both diplomacy and conquest, may have been reflecting on how posterity would remember him. Carving laws in stone ensured his legacy would outlast him. In the stele's prologue and epilogue, he presents himself as a guardian of widows and orphans, a protector of the weak against the strong, a ruler chosen by the gods to establish righteousness on earth. Padani notes, they show that Hammurabi cared a lot about being viewed as a fair and just king, both in his own time and in future. To future generations and perhaps to his many subjects, Hammurabi wanted to appear not just as a conqueror but as a philosopher of justice. Justice as divine mandate. Hammurabi's political messaging is reinforced by the monument's dramatic artwork. Atop the stele, he is shown receiving the laws from Shamash, the god of the sun and divine judge of both mortals and gods. Kelly and Diamond highlights what this imagery conveyed. Hammurabi wanted to be perceived as a just ruler who protected his citizens, in addition to a surrogate for the gods on earth, war leader, builder, and final judge. By linking his power to the gods, Hammurabi bolstered the legitimacy of his rule. His laws were not just royal commands, they were divine mandates. Disobedience was not only treason, it was impiety. Symbolic law, real justice. Even though the code may not have been consulted directly in courtroom cases, its symbolic value was real and profound. It represented the idea that laws apply to everyone, that judgments must follow established principles, and that society should be governed by justice rather than arbitrary violence. In a world where rulers often boasted of conquest or divine favor, Hammurabi chose instead to immortalize law. The code became a bridge between ancient custom and the concept of universal legal standards, a legacy still visible in modern courts and constitutions today. The ideal of justice, what Hammurabi wanted his laws to mean. When we look at the monumental basalt stele of Hammurabi, we see more than ancient rulings etched in stone. We see an idea of vision of justice meant to outlive the king who proclaimed it. To modern eyes, the Code of Hammurabi is a legal document, but to the Babylonians, it was a symbol, a towering reminder that order, fairness, and truth were sacred duties shared by kings and citizens alike. Though debates continue about how often judges reference the written code in real courtrooms, the values embodied in the text remain unmistakable. The code presents a world where justice must be impartial, where even the most powerful individuals are theoretically subject to the same legal expectations as common laborers. It is not perfection carved in stone, it is aspiration carved in stone. A justice system built on truth, oaths, and testimony long before Hammurabi's inscriptions. Mesopotamia had already developed a surprisingly sophisticated legal culture. As historian Amanda Pedoni explains, Babylonians placed enormous emphasis on uncovering the truth of a case far more than on adhering strictly to written rules. Their system employed witnesses, called to recount events under oral testimony, given before panels of judge-written contracts, meticulously recorded by scribes. Sacred oaths sworn before the gods. Oath was perhaps the most powerful legal tool of all. A Mesopotamian who lied under oath didn't merely risk punishment from human courts, he risked divine retribution. Gods were believed to enforce honesty with a severity no earthly judge could match. Because of this, oaths carried tremendous weight, and in many cases, they were enough to decide disputes conclusively. Trials were often recorded line by court scribes, whose clay tablets survive today. These records reveal a legal system that, while not perfect, was trusted by the people it served. It provided structure where chaos might otherwise flourish, preventing vendettas and vigilante justice in a world where the temptation for self-defense and revenge was strong, a symbol of impartiality in an unequal world. One of the code's most enduring contributions is its insistence, at least in theory, that justice must be impartial. Hammurabi used the language of fairness to craft an image of himself as a ruler who protected the vulnerable as much as the elite. In the preface and epilogue of the code, he presents himself as a guardian of widows and orphans, a shepherd of the oppressed, a king entrusted by the gods to defend the weak, an arbiter who listens even to those without wealth or influence. At this rhetorical emphasis matters. In a world stratified by class, wealth, and status, Hammurabi wanted it known that anyone could appeal to his justice, rich or poor, noble or commoner. Pedoni highlights that this principle, though imperfectly realized, is one that modern societies still aspire to. The notion that every person deserves access to fair judgment remains foundational in courts around the world. The stele as propaganda and as promise. It would be naive to imagine Hammurabi's code operating like modern legislation. It was as much political theater as legal instruction, a way for Hammurabi to immortalize his reign as enlightened, just, and divinely sanctioned. The carving at the top of the stele shows Hammurabi receiving authority from Shamash, the god of justice, lending divine legitimacy to his rule. Yet propaganda does not diminish the code's cultural power. Even if judges rarely consulted the monumental inscription, its symbolism helped shape how people understood law, authority, and fairness. It declared that justice was not arbitrary. It should be reasoned, structured, and grounded in principles larger than one man's whim. Hammurabi wanted his subjects to believe, perhaps for the first time in history, that they lived under a system where justice was not the privilege of the elite but a right belonging to all. Legacy that outlived an empire. The irony is poignant. Though Hammurabi's empire eventually faded, his ideals endured. His emphasis on evidence, sworn testimony, impartiality, and the king's responsibility to safeguard the vulnerable foreshadowed concepts that now define modern justice systems. It is this symbolic power, not the literal enforcement of the laws, that made Hammurabi's code one of the most influential legal monuments in human history. It whispered a radical idea across the centuries: justice must protect everyone, especially those who have no power. Hammurabi's Code was not the first legal system in history, though Hammurabi's Code is often celebrated as the world's earliest written set of laws. History tells a more nuanced story. Hammurabi's famous 282 laws etched into a 7-foot basalt stele nearly 3,800 years ago were revolutionary. But they were not the first attempt to record justice in writing. Centuries before Hammurabi ever sat on Babylon's throne, other Mesopotamian rulers had already begun shaping written legal traditions. The oldest known surviving laws come from Ur-Nammu, a Sumerian king who ruled the city-state of around 2100 BC. His code, though fragmentary today, outlined fines and penalties for crimes ranging from theft to bodily harm. It emphasized monetary compensation over physical punishment, an approach surprisingly humane for its time. Another predecessor, the Code of Lipitishtar c. 1930 BC, was written nearly 200 years before Hammurabi. Lipitishtar ruled over the city-state of Isin and crafted laws that regulated marriage, inheritance, property disputes, and the treatment of slaves. His legal writings included formal prefaces and literary flourishes similar to those later used by Hammurabi, suggesting a shared cultural heritage in lawmaking. These early codes did not simply inspire Hammurabi, they established a legal tradition in ancient Mesopotamia. Hammurabi expanded, formalized, and publicized this tradition in a way no king before him had done. His laws were more detailed, more comprehensive, and crucially displayed publicly on massive stone monuments where any literate citizen could, in theory, read them, rather than the starting point of legal history. Hammurabi's Code was the pinnacle of a long evolution, a grand synthesis of centuries of legal thought drawn from the world's first urban civilizations. The code contained harsh, unusual, and sometimes brutal punishments. Hammurabi's Code is remembered not only for its sophistication but also for its intense and often shocking severity. It stands as one of the clearest ancient examples of lex talionis, the law of retribution, summed up in the famous phrase an eye for an eye. But in Hammurabi's Babylon, this principle extended far beyond what modern readers might imagine. The code insisted that punishment should mirror the crime, at least among social equals. If one citizen broke another's bone, the offender's own bone would be broken in return. If a builder constructed a house that collapsed and killed the owner's son, the builder's son would be put to death. The intention was not simple cruelty, but a harsh form of cosmic balance, ensuring that wrongdoing never disrupted the moral order. Yet many punishments went well beyond mirroring harm. They were dramatic, symbolic, and profoundly frightening. Crimes involving betrayal, dishonor, or violations against family and the gods often received the most grisly sentences. A son who struck his father, for example, would have his hands cut off, severing not only the offending act but the very instruments of rebellion. A mother and son caught in incestuous relations were condemned to be burned alive, purifying the offense through fire. Lovers who plotted to kill their spouses met a brutal fate as well. They were executed by impalement, a punishment designed to echo the perceived corruption of their joint crime. For accusations that could not be proven with evidence such as sorcery, curses, or other spiritual offenses, Babylonian justice employed a dramatic method known as trial by ordeal. In these cases, the gods themselves were asked to reveal the truth. The accused might be thrown into a river or made to leap into dangerous waters. If he drowned, the verdict was clear. The gods had judged him guilty, and his accuser would inherit his property. But if he survived and escaped the river's grasp, the gods had spoken in his favor. His accuser, now exposed as a liar, would face death. To the modern world, these punishments appear barbaric. But in Hammurabi's Babylon, they represented a deeply spiritual worldview, one in which justice was not merely a human system but a divine mandate, enforced with the unmistakable clarity of fear, symbolism, and cosmic reciprocity. Justice in Hammurabi's Babylon was not equal. It varied sharply by class and gender. While Hammurabi's code is often praised as an early attempt to create a structured legal system, it also reveals a world built upon rigid hierarchies. Justice was not blind in ancient Babylon. Instead, it looked closely at who committed the crime and who suffered from it. The same offense could result in dramatically different consequences depending on one's status: freeborn, noble, commoner, or slave, and one's gender. The code made clear distinctions between social equals and those of lesser rank. For example, the law famously states, "If a man knocks out the teeth of his equal, his teeth shall be knocked out." This is classic lex talionis, punishment mirroring the injury. But if the victim belonged to a lower social class, the offender did not lose his own teeth, he simply paid a fine. The body of a high-status citizen was sacred. The body of a lower-status person could be compensated with silver. Even more striking were the laws dealing with death and injury. If a man killed a pregnant maidservant, a woman of servile status, he owed a monetary penalty. But if he killed a pregnant freeborn woman, the retribution was far harsher. His own daughter would be put to death. The life of a noblewoman was not just valued, it was protected by extreme reciprocal violence, sometimes inflicted on an innocent family member, underscoring how deeply honor and lineage shaped Mesopotamian justice. Gender, too, played a powerful role in the law. Male behavior was judged with significantly more lenience, especially within marriage. Men could take concubines, sleep with maidservants, or have children outside wedlock without legal consequence. Women, however, were held to a far stricter moral standard. If a wife engaged in adultery, even under coercive or complicated circumstances, the code decreed that she and her lover should be bound together and thrown into the Euphrates River, left for the gods to judge. It was possible for a husband to pardon his wife, allowing them both to survive, but the power of mercy always lay with the man, never with the woman. Through these laws, Hammurabi's code reveals a society that sought order through strict hierarchy. Justice was not a universal principle applied evenly to all. It was a reflection of Babylon's social architecture, a world where class dictated value, gender dictated behavior, and law functioned as both a guide and a mirror of ancient Mesopotamian life. Hammurabi's code established one of the world's first minimum wages. Among its harsher punishments and strict social rules, Hammurabi's code also contained ideas that feel surprisingly modern. One of the most progressive concepts woven into the ancient laws was the establishment of something resembling a minimum wage, a formal attempt to regulate pay and protect workers from exploitation. At a time when most societies left compensation entirely to the whims of employers or local custom, Hammurabi took the unprecedented step of specifying exact wages for many key professions. These laws acknowledged the essential nature of labor in Babylon's economy and the king's responsibility to ensure fairness, at least within the rigid boundaries of Mesopotamian hierarchy. The code sets out clear standards. Field workers and herdsmen, whose labor fed the nation, were guaranteed an acre of grain per year, a meaningful salary in a grain-based economy. Ox drivers and sailors, vital for transportation and trade along the Euphrates, received 6 ger. These fixed wages helped stabilize rural life, support agriculture, and reduce disputes over fair compensation. Hammurabi even regulated the fees of skilled specialists, including physicians. A doctor who set a broken bone or performed a healing procedure earned 5 shekels for treating a freeborn man, 3 shekels for a freed person, 2 shekels for a slave, though unequal by modern standards. This scale shows two remarkable realities of ancient Babylon. First, that professional medical care existed. Second, that it was formally priced and overseen by the state. These wage laws reveal a ruler concerned with more than conquest and control. Hammurabi envisioned an economy where work had regulated value, where social order depended on predictability, and where the king claiming divine responsibility was the guardian of fairness in daily life, for all its harshness. The Code of Hammurabi was not simply about punishment. It was also about structure, stability, and the protection of society's labor force, demonstrating once again how far-reaching this ancient legal system truly was. Hammurabi's code contains one of the earliest expressions of innocent until proven guilty, for all its fierce punishments and strict social rules. The Code of Hammurabi also introduced legal principles that echo through modern courtrooms. Among them is one of history's earliest surviving examples of the presumption of innocence, a concept now fundamental to justice systems around the world. In Hammurabi's Babylon, accusations could be life-altering or life-ending. To prevent false charges and protect citizens from malicious claims, the code established a striking requirement. The accuser carried the burden of proof. If they failed to demonstrate guilt, the consequences were severe. One law states plainly, if a man brings an accusation of a capital crime and cannot prove it, he shall be put to death. Harsh as it seems, this served as a powerful deterrent against slander, manipulation, and political scheming. It also meant that, even in a deeply hierarchical society, a person could not be condemned without evidence, testimony, or witnesses, an extraordinary notion for the ancient world. The code also outlined judicial procedures recognizable today. When two parties found themselves in dispute, they could bring their case before appointed judges. They were expected to present witnesses, provide documents or physical evidence, and submit their claims for impartial evaluation. Judges were required to review the evidence carefully, swear oaths of honesty, and record their verdicts, laying the groundwork for organized courts. This legal structure offered something rare in early civilizations, a process meant to protect the innocent, regulate conflict, and prevent revenge-based justice. Though not equal for all social classes, it nonetheless represented a major shift toward a world governed by rules, rather than by the powerful whims of the moment. In many ways, the famous code carved in stone nearly 3,800 years ago foreshadows the values that modern societies still aspire to uphold: fairness, proof, responsibility, and the belief that truth must be established before judgment is passed. Historians still debate how Hammurabi's code actually worked in Babylonian society. While the Code of Hammurabi is one of the most iconic legal texts of the ancient world, its precise function within Babylonian society remains one of history's enduring mysteries. The 282 laws carved in stone tell us a great deal about values, customs, and social expectations. But how these laws were used, or whether they were used at all, is still unclear. Some historians believe the stele functioned as a kind of legal update, a list of amendments added to a much older and broader body of laws that govern everyday life. Others argue it served more like a collection of judicial precedents. a compilation of rulings drawn from real cases heard by judges and scribes, essentially a reference manual for legal professionals. Still others propose a more symbolic interpretation, that the code wasn't a practical tool of governance, but rather royal propaganda. In this view, Hammurabi carved the laws into stone not to create a courtroom handbook, but to broadcast an image of himself as the king who brought order, fairness, and justice to his people. The stele would have been a monument to his greatness and enduring message that linked his authority directly to divine justice. What we do know is that the monument was intended for public display. Its final lines read almost like a promise and an invitation. In the epilogue, Hammurabi proclaims that any citizen embroiled in a dispute could read the great stone and find out what is just, and his heart will be glad. Whether this was poetic aspiration or a practical reality remains uncertain, but the sentiment itself reveals something profound. Hammurabi wanted his people to see him as a guardian of fairness, a ruler who placed justice at the center of his legacy. And in that sense, if not always in legal practice, the code fulfilled its purpose. The code lived on long after Babylon fell, though Hammurabi's own empire crumbled within a few generations of his death. His laws proved astonishingly resilient, far more enduring than the political world that produced them. After Hammurabi died around 1750 BC, Babylon entered a slow decline. Civil unrest, weakened leadership, and external pressure left the once formidable kingdom vulnerable. In 1595 BC, the Hittites swept down from Anatolia, sacked Babylon, and carried off its treasures. The city that Hammurabi had transformed into a powerful capital collapsed almost overnight. And yet, his code survived, despite the fall of Babylon and the constant turnover of rulers: Kassites, Assyrians, Chaldeans. The legal and intellectual legacy of Hammurabi continued to influence Mesopotamian courts, schools, and scribal traditions for centuries. Judges and administrators referenced versions of his laws long after his dynasty vanished from the political map. In an age when conquerors often erased the cultural achievements of those they defeated, Hammurabi's laws remained too valuable to discard. Scribes, the guardians of Mesopotamian knowledge, played a crucial role in preserving this legacy. For generations, scribal students copied the code onto clay tablets as part of their formal training, just as modern law students study landmark cases. Some of these tablets date from as late as the 5th century BC, more than 1,000 years after Hammurabi's lifetime. These fragments show that the code was not only remembered but actively taught, replicated, and transmitted across empires. In this way, Hammurabi achieved something rare even among kings. His ideas outlasted his kingdom. The stone stele with its 282 laws had become more than a legal document. It became a vessel of cultural memory, passed from one civilization to the next, ensuring that the voice of a king who lived nearly 4 millennia ago would continue to echo across time. Lost for millennia, rediscovered only in the 20th century. For centuries after Hammurabi's empire collapsed, his laws continued to circulate in copies and fragments across Mesopotamia. But as time passed, kingdoms fell, languages vanished, and cultures shifted. Eventually, the memory of the original monument, the towering black stele carved with 282 laws, simply disappeared. By the medieval period, Hammurabi's name itself had faded into myth, known only to a few scholars puzzling over rare cuneiform tablets. And then, for nearly 2,000 years, the code lay completely forgotten. It wasn't until December 1901 that history stirred again. A French archaeological expedition led by Jacques de Morgan was digging among the ruins of ancient Susa in southwestern Iran, once the proud capital of the Elamite Empire. Deep beneath the dust and broken walls, Workers uncovered something astonishing, a massive, polished slab of black diorite, standing over 7 feet tall and weighing nearly 4 tons. When they cleared away the earth, the truth emerged. The lost laws of Hammurabi had been found. How did Babylon's most famous monument end up so far from home? Historians believe the stele was stolen in the 12th century BC by the Elamite king Shutruk-Nahin, who waged a devastating campaign against the Babylonian city of Sippar. Victorious, he carried the stele off as a trophy of war, parading it back to Susa, proof that even the greatest kings of Babylon could be humbled. Ironically, Shutruk-Nahin seems to have intended to carve his own achievements into the stele. Portions of Hammurabi's text were deliberately chiseled out to make space for a new royal inscription, but for unknown reasons, the Elamite king never added a single word. The stone remained in Susa, silent and untouched, until the sands of time swallowed it. Today, the monument stands in the Louvre Museum in Paris, where visitors from around the world can view the very stone that shaped the legal imagination of civilizations for millennia. Smooth, imposing, and written in the angular strokes of cuneiform, it is one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the modern age. A forgotten lawgiver became immortal once more, rescued from oblivion by the persistence of history and the patience of Earth. The king who still whispers through stone. Nearly 4,000 years have passed since Hammurabi walked the streets of Babylon, yet his voice has never truly fallen silent. It echoes in courtrooms, in constitutions, in the careful language of justice that still shapes how we think about right and wrong. It lingers in the idea that law must be written clearly, applied fairly, and offered to everyone, not just the powerful, but the poor, the voiceless, the forgotten. For his own people, Hammurabi was more than a king. He was the guardian of order in a world that could so easily fall into chaos. He was the builder of canals, temples, granaries, the negotiator who could smile today and strike tomorrow, the warrior who sealed alliances with generosity and ended them with fire. But when the dust of his victories settled, when empires rose and collapsed over the bones of Mesopotamia, what remained was not the conquests, not the palaces, not even the walls of Babylon. What remained was the idea that a just society must be built upon rules, not whims, that rulers must be held to the same standards as the ruled, that even a king's authority is strengthened, not weakened, by fairness. The Code of Hammurabi stands today in the Louvre, tall, dark, polished by centuries of silence. People pass by without realizing they are looking at one of the earliest attempts to answer a question humanity still struggles with. How do we build a world where justice has a place? The ancient stone does not give easy answers, but it does invite us to remember that justice is older than kingdoms, older than empires, older than history itself. Hammurabi is long gone. Babylon is dust. Yet his laws, carved in the hard black skin of a forgotten age, still whisper, let the strong not harm the weak. Let right be known. Let justice endure longer than kings. And so, across the centuries, the king who united Babylon continues to rule, not with armies, not with fear, but with the quiet, stubborn power of words carved in stone.